Welcome, everybody. It is great to be back. We are here for Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo Chapter 3, titled Swimming Through the Forest. And we're just going to dive directly into this one. The chapter opens up with the fact that a man-eating shark has apparently appeared, and their mission is to go and exterminate it. This is Usami talking to both the Okotsu siblings and also Maru as well. And Yuka brings up the fact that if it's a shark, shouldn't that be something that the government takes care of and not them as a sorcerer? But Tsurugi points out the fact that there must be a reason why they're dispatching Jujutsu sorcerers instead of, taking care of it with just normal non-sorcerers. It's a shark. Why do we need, our paranormal superheroes to take on this shark? But Usami points out the fact that it was spotted in Gifu, which I am sorry, I'm not familiar with all the different prefectures that are in Japan, but it shows us a map, and it is actually one that is landlocked, which means on all sides of it, there is only land. So they're like, oh, well, did it swim up a river or something? And Usami's just like, no, this shark swims through the forest. And we get this awesome panel of literally a shark floating in the forest, looking totally menacing. So the first thought, that popped up into my head was, oh, it's a cursed spirit, obviously. The sharks don't just swim through the air. That's not something that happens. So we continue on. We have our, trio on a bullet train, obviously heading out to the prefecture, the Gifu prefecture. And we have Tsurugi internally is like, don't talk to me, which is funny because he's seemingly holding, obviously, a grudge from his encounter at the end of last chapter with Cross, whom he believed to be Maru, and clearly still does not know that it wasn't him. So this is where Tsurugi actually brings up something very interesting that's different about Modulo, is the fact that cursed spirits apparently only appear in Tokyo. And he explains that ever since the Inhuman Makyao, so the Shinjuku showdown, ever since that happened, that they basically have not shown up anywhere else outside of Tokyo in decades. Now, we do know that after the events of Shibuya, when Kenjaku releases all those cursed spirits and activates the culling games, the government and the higher-ups' response to that situation is to actually tell the general populace that cursed spirits only appear in Tokyo, because they wanted to direct all of that panic, hysteria, and negative emotions that we know strengthen and create cursed spirits. They wanted to channel that and direct it towards Tokyo so that it would isolate the appearance of more additional cursed spirits and not have them showing up everywhere else on top of it. And then obviously with the full Shinjuku showdown, apparently that is where, they did call it ground zero, literally. So it seems like they only appear there still to this day. So that's why they're like, oh, this is so weird that a cursed spirit would be showing up anywhere else. And Maru actually doesn't even know what cursed spirits are, so they explain it to them. And missions to exercise abominations, like, they just haven't had any missions outside of Tokyo for exercising cursed spirits, which is very interesting. And I guess it actually makes the Jujutsu sorcerer's ability or missions a little bit easier, because they're not actually having to travel all across the entire country to dispatch and exercise cursed spirits. They basically have a one tight-knit area that they would show up in. Now that also might result in them actually being more powerful. Not sure. They didn't really give us that information. But they basically, Tsurugi begins to make points about how rare it is that a cursed spirit showed up outside of Tokyo. And he's like, oh, well, what a coincidence that it happened at the same time that you aliens showed up. And Yuka's basically, because Maru is so innocent and so nice, he doesn't realize that Tsurugi is kind of like potentially pointing the blame at him and his people. So Yuka kind of has to step in and say, like, oh, he's saying maybe the man-eating shark is actually another alien like you and your people. And Maru freaks out because, we already know he's all about wanting to coexist in harmony between the Simurians and the humans. So he's like, I swear my compatriots like don't look like that picture. Like we don't eat people either. He's like, he's covering all his bases. It's like, it's not us. We're not sharks. And Yuka's like, oh, so you're an alien after all. So he just confirms. But he does say that he's sorry and he will talk about it with them when the proper time arises. And she's just like, well, yeah, I'm sure like you and Usami have the reason for why you can't tell us about it yet. Like, I know you're a bad guy, or not a bad guy, probably, which is really funny. I just love seeing, I love seeing their little personalities pop out, because even a little earlier, I forgot to touch on the fact that Tsurugi mentions like, oh, so I'm allowed to talk to you today, like speaking to Maru, because Maru had asked him a question about curse spirits, which clearly Tsurugi is still holding on to what happened with Cross. And he's like, so I can talk to you today. But we get our group finally. They must have, off screen, they showed up at that prefecture, and it opens up with Yuka talking with some of the locals in the village that were eyewitnesses of what happened. And she's just trying to confirm like what they really saw. Like, are you sure? You sure it wasn't like this, like a bear? You sure it wasn't that? And everyone's like, no, we saw like a shark. Like, we know it. Everything happened. The autopsies have bite marks that aren't from like a bear or anything that's, typically locally found in that area. So she's like, well, I'll meet up with you guys when I'm done talking to the other witnesses. And so Tsurugi and Maru are already kind of going up into the mountains trying to look for this shark. And he kind of talks about the fact that, are you sure? He's asking Maru, like, are you sure these kind of things aren't secretly happening all over Japan? And Maru's just like, what do you mean? And he's like, I'm asking if you guys are launching an underwater invasion. So basically, slowly all over the nation, just having these secret attacks occurring that are just unusual, but hard to confirm. And Maru thinks to himself, like, I'm here so that doesn't happen, which we know is the truth for Maru. But he can't completely speak for all of his people, because we know that they're currently split 50-50 between coexistence and potential conflict. So it's like, while he can say at least what he's doing personally, he may not be able to, he's going to say that his people aren't going to do that, but he also is probably not privy to all discussions and all missions that are potentially being carried out currently. And, this is actually where Maru makes a good stand for himself, because he points out, like, well, what about you? Like, what about Earthlings? And do you think their rationality and morality is developed enough to criticize aliens? Which, I mean, is kind of a good point, because We still fight. We still kill each other. We still have terrible things happen all the time. Huge divides and rifts in our society. People not being able to use rationality on a daily basis. It's a good point. But then Tsurugi claps back at him like, what? Like, you've got a lot of nerve talking like that after you barged into somebody else's turf. Like, you're going to barge in and then point the finger at us to say, you're not living properly, which, I mean, is kind of, that's kind of like, you have the audacity. Like, come on, dude. And this is where Maru actually gives a glimpse into something that I personally have been wanting to know. And he says, like, it's not like I wanted to. Referencing having to come to somebody else's turf or come to someone else's home. He's saying that he didn't want to. And we know that the Sumerians, the 50,000 of them, are considered refugees. And one of my very first questions that I was thinking about is, what were they fleeing? Because, like, did they have a home planet that they left willingly? But the way he says it, it seems not. It seems like he didn't leave willingly. Because it's basically, they're like, they have a home planet, they left willingly. They have a home planet, they had to leave. So not of their own free will. Either there was an invasion, civil war, natural resources depleted, all that kind of stuff, when they had to actually leave their home planet, never to return. Or 3, they are spacefaring people that travel all around that didn't necessarily want to have to, like, pick a place to stay, but for some reason they have to right now. So this is just really interesting. I'd love to hear from anybody down below what their running belief is. I'm erring on the side of they had to leave not of their own will, and more than likely my thought would be something around resources. So a depletion of resources and the planet no longer being sustainable. They weren't living in harmony with their home world. And maybe that's something that we will continue to see in regards to Earth. So just let me know what you guys think below. This part of the plot deeply intrigues me. I want to know more information on the Sumerians and their culture and what their homeworld was like and just why they had to flee. So we continue on with their argument about the fact that Maru is like, well, why are you even picking a fight with me? Like, what is your problem? And he's like, Tsurugi is like, I'm a Jujutsu sorcerer. I could die during a mission at any time, so I cannot afford to have an idiot like you by my side. Because Maru is very ignorant on basically everything that they do and seems to be a bit clumsy. We had a very cool moment from him in the first chapter, but seemingly not the most competent warrior at the time. But that could change. And he points out that Tsurugi sounds just like his brother, and what about him is just so stupid. And Tsurugi's like, well, when you defeated that curse user, like, I don't know what kind of curse technique that was, but if you were capable of pulling that off, meaning just being able to knock out that dude instantly, why did you not just do that in the first place? Why did you not just open with that? And Maru's like, well, I explained that already. Like, the higher ups ordered me not to get involved during the mission. I cannot interfere. And Tsurugi's like, you would put those orders above a kid's life, which is a very, very good point. Because if you're going to come in here and say that you want, harmony and coexistence, it's like you did have an opportunity to potentially mitigate the risk to a child's life. But this is where the funniest part of the chapter occurs. They're in the middle of their, verbal combat, and just this shark just comes swimming through the air between these trees. Honestly, beautifully drawn shark, by the way. And we just get these hilarious reaction panels of Tsurugi and Maru. And Tsurugi instantly is about to attack the shark. But Maru points out the fact that if he uses his curse tool, won't he just cause a wildfire? He literally shoots flames out of his sword. And Tsurugi's just like, good point. How about you make yourself useful then, you good for nothing? And Maru just takes that opportunity to literally just jump and bear hug this shark. And he is just riding this thing. Like, okay, now you can attack it. But before they even have a chance to, there's just a dude's face on the bottom of this shark. And he's like, I haven't seen you kids before. So it's just a dude. They say it's just an old guy. And he's like, well, I'm like, who are you calling old? I'm only 46. And they're like, that's exactly why we called you old. That makes you old. You're 46. And he instantly is like, oh, are you guys students from Jujutsu High? Like, why are you all the way out here in the boonies? And they're like, how do you know about Jujutsu High? And he's like, well, I better. Like, I graduated from there. Like, how else could I have been able to pull this off, this shark thing? And they explain how they're on a exorcism mission for a man-eating shark. And they're like, is that you? And he's like, the shark dude is like, do I look like I'd eat a person? He's like, I haven't had a decent meal at all lately, just booze and snacks, which is hilarious because Tsurugi's like, that's a problem within itself. But this guy's name is Osada, and he is a former Jujutsu sorcerer, so he must have retired. And it's actually a man-eating tiger has been what's appearing here, not the shark. He is the shark, but the tiger is what has actually been causing the uproar and the deaths of the people. And he's like, the tiger's name is Torinosuke, and I've been chasing after him. And they're like, a wild tiger in Japan? And basically what happened is, over a quarter century ago, a pair of tigers were brought in illegal by foreign traders, and they made this mountain their home. And Torinosuke is actually the grandchild of this inbreeding process. And he just talks about, Osada talks about how smart Torinosuke is. And he talks about how basically the reason for this whole situation is that a massive solar plant near the top of the mountain, which was actually at the end of its operational run, got restored because of funds from the paranormal treaty that we know about. So obviously outside funds from, I'm assuming, different countries that signed the treaty, since they are offloading paranormal issues to Japan. Japan needs additional resources, and is compensated for taking on that extra burden. And apparently getting some solar panel fields back up was, where some of the funds had gone. But because of that, the river dried up, and that basically pushed Torinosuke further down the mountain to look for prey and for water. And that's where he's run across some of the villagers. But Osada talks about the fact that he doesn't want to take down Torinosuke. He wants to save him. But Tsurugi's like, well, it's a beast that has has killed people. Like, it needs to be exterminated, especially now that it has officially gotten a taste for human beings. Like, it's not going to stop. And Osada's like, well, you don't have to tell me that, kid, but like, it's different because he was chased out of his home due to human circumstances. And it's like, now you want to take him out because of human circumstances. So it's, not very fair to the tiger, because he's only there attacking humans because of what humans have done to his home. And they're basically like, he points out the fact that he will just take care of Toranosuke because he lives out in the boonies and he's a jujutsu sorcerer, so he can manage a tiger or two. And Tsurugi is still completely against the idea, but Osada also stands firm in his resolve, because he says that once he chose the path of coexistence, he's not going to change his mind about it. And this gets Maru thinking about coexistence for his people and the humans. So this harmony, this coexistence, potential opportunities for conflict, you can see this theme popping up all over the place, and it's only been 3 chapters. So this is clearly the very core of Modulo. And Maru wants to also save the tiger, and Tsurugi is standing firm, like, no, what if he ends up killing more people? And he's just saying that even if, basically, even if, like, if anything else happens to more people, then there would just be more people, like the victims and the bereaved of the family. Like, even if Osada takes responsibility by slitting his own belly, like, it doesn't matter, because that doesn't help the families that are negatively impacted by this tiger. And this is where the conversation gets interrupted, because Osada's like, stop right there, he's close, and he just jets off. And he's like, well, why the heck do you think I summoned a shark? Because his sorcery, sorry, I did actually end up skipping over the part where he talks about his sorcery. And his curse technique is a seance that allows him to summon and draw out the powers of whatever he wears, regardless of the location. So the reason he summoned a shark with his seance is the nose is made for smelling blood. We know that sharks can smell blood in the water from a very, very far distance. So he's using that to try to track Toranosuke. And he tracks it to the base of this tree, and he shows up, and it turns out the tiger was so smart that it smeared blood on the tree to bait him there, and it was waiting in ambush up in another tree behind him, and it jumps down and slashes Osada's arm. But Tsurugi comes in, body checks Toranosuke out of the way, and Maru goes to plead with Tsurugi not to take the tiger down, but even Osada is like, no, it's fine. And Osada has some flashbacks on when he met Toranosuke, when he was just this cute little fluffy tiger, and he's talking about the fact that being alone is not so bad, and I just know that it'll make you stronger. And he's just loving on this little tiger. But he's like, you can come to my place anytime if you're dealing with some real trouble. And he said that ever since Osada was holding out hope that the little cub that he knew was still in there. But the one that he knew back then, now seeing him currently, he knows that the tiger that he knew, the cub that he knew, is gone. He is now a fully fledged wild beast that is a danger to the community and has to be put down because there's no getting through to him. And all he asks for from Tsurugi is to make sure that to not let Taranosuke suffer. And we don't get to actually see it, but Tsurugi, gets into his stance and assumedly does the Bato sword drawing and puts down Taranosuke. And we just have a nice moment between Tsurugi and Osada where Osada thanks him for, doing such an awful task. And Tsurugi then goes to speak to Maru, who's, he seems to be sulking a bit from the situation. And he just outright decides to inform Tsurugi about, his mission. And he's like, my job is to gather information to decide whether or not we can coexist with Earthlings. And his curse technique is actually shared with his younger brother. So he is forbidden to use it except for emergencies. And that is where Tsurugi thinks to himself, twin brothers, and thinks back to Cross, whom he saw at the top of that building. And Maru continues to talk about the fact that his brother can tell if he uses a lot of energy. So if it ever gets to the point where he has to use his powers, it would only make his brother trust Earthlings less, because that would show that Maru was put into a situation where he had to, utilize his own powers to continue. And that would mean that the faith and trust in Earthlings would go even lower. And he says that's why he ultimately hesitated previously. And it wasn't because he didn't care about an Earthling child's life. And Tsurugi apologizes, but he's like, should you really be telling me this? And before we continue on, this was something that I was super curious about when it came to Maru and Cross. Because we know that in Jujutsu, the rules, basically Jujutsu recognizes twins as one entity. That's why we have this situation where we had Maki and Mai, and they were considered one entity. And that's why Mai had very small amounts of cursed energy, very low pool. And obviously Maki, with her heavenly restriction, had very, very little as well. But neither one of them could ever achieve their full abilities because the other one is constantly putting restrictions on them because they are one whole instead of two separate beings. So I was curious if Maru and Cross were a similar scenario. And it seems like they, in their situation, they actually share their power. So they share the curse technique and presumably even the cursed energy, because he says that if he uses too much power or energy, that his brother will know immediately. So it's very interesting to see how theirs differs. And is there a resolution for where they can unlock their full potential without having to lose one of the siblings? Because we obviously know that was the case with Mai and Maki. But I'm hoping, because it seems like Maru truly does want to patch things up and become close with Cross. I'm hoping that does not have to be the case for those two siblings. But Tsurugi continues to ask, that you should not be telling me all this. And Maru's just like, yeah, not at all. But so I'd appreciate if you kept it a secret. But then Tsurugi's like, well, then why'd you decide to tell me? And Maru's answer is very simple. Like, he wants to be friends. He's like, because I want to be friends with you. And Maru is truly just a very empathetic and very sweet person. And he goes on to say that maybe the Sumerians and the tigers are similar, but at least, at least the Sumerians and the humans can speak the same language, because that's why he wants to tell Tsurugi as much as he can about himself. He has that opportunity because there is not a language barrier. There is a obvious tigers cannot speak English. So even if it's a more intelligent tiger, at the end of the day, it still cannot conventionally communicate. It does not have language, or at least our language. But while he's kind of pondering this and they're having this really nice moment, the brush rustles and this little tiny tiger cub waltzes out. And turns out that Tarunosuke actually had some cubs, or at least a cub. And Tsurugi hands the cub over to Osada and tells him to not take his eyes off of it this time. And Osada is overcome with emotion and tears and says that he will not. And Maru's like, "Are you sure about this?" And Tsurugi's like, "Doesn't matter. Nobody knows how that cub will ultimately turn out, just like with us." Speaking about them, their relationship, this whole Sumerian diplomatic situation that's going on. They have no idea what's going to happen, but he's willing to play it out and see and give the opportunity for coexistence. And at the very end, we cut away and we see that Yuka has just been stopped by all of these old ladies of the village who are just yapping her ear off and pretty much have her hostage. And it's just a very funny, another comedic end to a chapter, like chapter 2 with Tsurugi and Cross. This one's with Yuka and these grannies from the village. So that is the end of chapter 3 of Modulo. It was a very theme and narrative driven chapter. Greatly enjoyed it. We've got some good, we got more information regarding the Sumerians and their potential situation of not even wanting to be in this situation. And then we also got a little bit more information on how Maru and Cross and their relationship works along with their abilities. So it was a great chapter. I hope you guys all enjoyed the video. Let me know down below what your thoughts so far about Modulo are. I would love to hear them, and I hope you're having a great day or night wherever you are, and I will catch you guys in the next chapter. Peace.